Paragraph 1. Rome beneath the dusk. The last rays of sunlight fell gently over the crimson rooftops of Rome. This grand city was no longer ruled by philosophers and orators but by schemes, conspiracies, and blood. From the Palatine Hill, where Caesar sat on a marble bench amid a laurel garden, he could see the flickering lights of hundreds of torches. Below, a city that never truly slept, and now could never know peace. Whispers had begun. Pompey was raising legions in the south. Civil war was no longer a question of if, but when. On a narrow street east of the city, a young soldier leaned against an old wooden gate, listening to the murmurs from a nearby tavern. Titus Aelius, born to a shoemaker's family in Trastevere, had never imagined wearing the empire's armor, but now, he was a centurion, a commander of Roman soldiers. The armor on his chest no longer gleamed as it once did. It had seen harsh training battles, and soon it would be stained with real blood. Titus was summoned to Caesar's residence. The chamber brimmed with marble busts and maps. Caesar stood before a parchment of Italy, his finger pressed against the Rubicon, the boundary between politics and war. "You will be the one to lead," he said, voice like tempered steel. Titus bowed, asking no questions, doubting nothing. In the eyes of the great general, he saw a future already burning not with glory, but with fire, blood, and the fall of what had once been called a republic. The morning had not yet fully broken. Mist still veiled the peaks of the tents across the Roman camp. The earth, damp from the night's rain, muffled the weary footsteps of soldiers. Titus Aelius pulled open the flap of his tent and stepped outside, his breath turning to mist in the morning chill. The sharp ring of hammer on steel rang out from the armory, where sparks flew as blacksmiths sharpened swords. The scent of leather, rusted iron, and burning coal mingled into a smell only warriors knew one of war. The Roman soldiers had assembled. They stood in rows, each man clad in gleaming Larica segmentata armor, scutum shields held upright, helmets catching the first golden rays of the rising sun. Titus marched past them, his eyes sharp as blades, inspecting every detail. Were their caligae tightly strapped? Was the armor fitted right? Did their hands tremble? The wind whispered through the legion's banners. The golden Aquila standard of the legion stood tall in the center of the square. Like a god of iron, no one spoke. A solemn silence cloaked them all. Suddenly, the brass trumpet sounded long and low, the signal to break camp. All heads turned northward. Orders from Caesar had arrived. The legions would march across the Rubicon. There was no turning back. Titus glanced once more at the calm camp behind him, the place he had lived and trained for 3 years. Now, it was only the past. He grasped his gladius, fingers tightening around the hilt. The battles ahead would change Rome's history and his own fate. Chapter 3. The shadows beyond the Rubicon. A light rain fell as the Roman column moved northward. Mud clung to their boots, and the wheels of supply carts groaned in the wet earth. As the sun slipped away behind the clouds, a shout rose from the front. "Rubicon!" Titus rode forward. The river was small, its muddy waters unremarkable among Italy's many streams, yet it carried the weight of history. Caesar stood at the edge, his crimson cloak flapping in the wind, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He looked at the river as if he were staring into the abyss of fate. Caesar said nothing for a long time. All the soldiers stood still, eyes fixed on the one man who could alter the fate of the republic. At last, he turned and spoke. "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. No drums, no horns. His first step into the shallow river marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of civil war. Titus followed with his cohort. The water was icy up to their knees, but their hearts burned with heat. As they crossed to the far bank, Titus saw not enemies but abandoned villages, empty homes, cold hearths, altars without flame. The people had fled long ago. Every step the legion took now marked that war was no longer coming, it had already begun. Titus ordered camp to be set up. In the dark, as the moon began to rise, he gazed southward where Pompey waited, and deep inside, a voice echoed, "There is no turning back." Chapter 4. The traitor in the shadows. The camp lay silent in the dark, with only the crackle of fire and the quiet breath of horses. Titus was inside his tent, cleaning his sword with an old linen cloth, when a guard shouted from the gate, "Someone approaches!" A cloaked rider, soaked from crossing the river, was brought in. He knelt on one knee and presented a scroll sealed in red wax. Titus opened it with care. On the parchment was a hastily scrawled line in Latin. "There is one among you who serves Pompey. He wears a bronze eagle." The next morning, Titus personally inspected each unit. On the chest of every soldier were familiar symbols: lions, wolves, swords, but no bronze eagle. He didn't believe in coincidence. When he reached the auxiliary archers, his eyes landed on a new recruit, dark-skinned, short-haired, quiet. On his belt was a small clasp, a tarnished bronze eagle. Titus signaled his guards to surround the man. The soldier looked up and gave a cold, knowing smile. He didn't resist. When searched, they found a scroll hidden in the heel of his sandal. It showed a diagram of the camp's defenses, drawn in ink and blood. Titus required no trial. That night, the traitor was tied to a wooden post, and the fire was lit. No one spoke. There were no cheers, no drums, only the crackle of flames and the stench of burning flesh. Titus stood still, unblinking. It wasn't justice. It was a message to all who still hesitated in loyalty.